to the art of being human. You know, when we get stressed, our thoughts change and our thoughts become disordered. And what I mean by that is the fact that we're not thinking rationally. We are thinking certain thoughts that we have over and over again, and it's not necessarily realistic. I want to go over these distorted thoughts this morning because I think that we all have them. It's not a sign of mental illness. It's not a sign of a personality disorder. It may increase the power of defense mechanisms. It may not. But we all tend to do this. We all tend to retreat and say, well, it's my fault, or this happened, so it's going to happen again. And so we have all of these thoughts that aren't necessarily based on reality. But at the same time, they're the kinds of things that we think when we are having a disordered thought. So what I want to do is go over the disordered thoughts. They were written up by Burns, David Burns, and he wrote a book called Feeling Good, The New Mood Therapy. It's a good book. I like it. I've read a lot of things from different authors, and what I do is I tend to put them together with my own experience as a counselor to see what can help people. And so this is a list of the kinds of thinking that you may be doing if you are in a high-stress situation, or if you've just gone past a high-stress situation, but you know you're a little tenuous, you're afraid it's going to happen again. So there are about 10 of these things, and I want to go into them because I think that there are a lot of you who are in stressful situations or just gotten out of stressful situations that you're going to be thinking about, and you're going to be thinking like this. And you need to help yourself not to think so strongly in the way that you are, because what you're doing is you're putting a negative slant on everything that you're thinking. So here's the first one: all or nothing. This is sometimes called black and white thinking, all or nothing thinking. In other words, if you don't do everything right, you're a failure. If I don't have a class that's perfect, then it's an absolute failure. If I'm giving a speech and I miss a thought when I wished I'd said it, well, the speech was another failure. So you have to be perfect all the time. And if you're not perfect all the time, then you fail. Well, of course, it's not true. You know, no one is a success all the time. No one does everything perfectly. Sometimes we're going to mispronounce words. Sometimes we're going to not say something we wish we had said. Sometimes we're going to get things out of order. So it's black and white. It's either perfect or nothing. If you don't get an A, then you fail. Well, there's a lot between A and fail. I know I had a student where her mother came in and her mother was angry with me because she didn't think I was being fair. She said, you know, my daughter brings home her test results, you know, or my daughter brings home the test because I would hand them back to the class, and she's got all A's. Why would you give her a C if she has all A's? And of course the answer's obvious. Her daughter didn't bring home everything, only showed her the best. So the mother had the idea that if her daughter wasn't an A+ student all the time, that she wasn't a good student, and what was worse, I was a lousy teacher because she's such a good student that she must get all A's. Now common sense tells you that this is not right. This is not the way it is. You know, people sometimes fail. People sometimes don't get A's. People sometimes do things odd that are different. Some people fail a test. It doesn't mean that they aren't good students. You know, I would take students that were failing oftentimes, and I had very, very few. I made sure that I taught them in such a way that they'd be able to remember enough so they wouldn't be failing. But if there was a child that had a problem, I would take the child to one side and I'd work with them privately. This will help you to do this. And I had one student who had very low grades, and I knew she knew the material. I knew she knew what I wanted her to do on the test, but somehow she had test anxiety, and so therefore she was getting low grades, and I had to mark her low because she wasn't getting anything right, you know. But I also knew that she had the capability. So this is where I step in as a teacher and I say, you know, we can help you with this. And she came to me one day before a test, and she says, I'm going to flunk it. I know I'm going to flunk this test. But I want you to know that I studied and I know the material. And this gave me the perfect opportunity to say, okay, why don't you sit down and I'll give you some questions. And I gave her some questions, and she got them all right. And so what I did was I showed her my rank book, and I said, you just passed the test with an A. And the reason I can give you the A is because the purpose of a test is to find out if you know the material. You obviously know the material. You deserve an A. You're going to get an A. And I put it right in the rank book so she could see it. And her mouth dropped. She couldn't believe I was doing it. She expected to fail. And I said, I want you to take the test like the other students this afternoon. Don't worry about your grade. Whether you get them all right or whether you get them all wrong, it doesn't matter. You're still going to get the A. So you can take the test and you can relax with it, knowing full well that you're going to be okay. And she did take the test, and she got practically everything right. She got very high grade on it. And of course, I marked it an A because I'm going to always keep my promises to a student. You earned the A, you're going to get the A. So she did get the A, and I marked it right on her paper when I passed it back to her. And after that, she learned how to relax on a test. I think she must have been able to do it because after that, all of her tests were very high grade. And I wanted to write, sometimes I would write notes to each student when I passed back the grade, the test, and it would all be encouraging remarks. Every time you have a failure, you need to encourage a student. Every time they seem not to be able to do what you think they can do, you need to encourage them. Causing them to feel bad about what they're doing is not going to help them get better. What you're teaching them to do is to expect to fail and to feel bad about it. And I don't want that to happen to anybody. I certainly don't want to have it happen to any of my students. So I take them to one side. This is what we can do to help you do better. You're going to be okay. And my students, most of them got very high grades because I made sure that they could, and I made sure I encouraged them. What happens when you do something and it turns out it's not as good as you expected? You start thinking of yourself as an utter failure, and that's where the black and white thinking comes in. I didn't do it this time, that means I can't do it. I failed this time, that means I'm always going to fail. You know, you project into the future what your problem is today. You know, if I'm not perfect, I'm a failure. If I don't get everything right, I'm a failure. And that just isn't true. Everybody has a moment when they're not as good as they usually are. Everybody has a moment when they don't feel good, when they lose their direction. And so therefore they do something wrong or they do something different and it doesn't work out. And it doesn't mean they're a failure. It means they had a bad day. So I would take the students who were having bad days and I'd help them to correct it. You can do it. You're smart enough to do it. You'll be okay. All you have to do is, and I would provide them with certain steps they could take. So all or nothing thinking or black and white thinking, it means the same thing. Both phrases are used. When you do things perfectly, or you're a total failure. You have to expect that you can't win all the time. You have to expect that at some point you may not do as well as you want. It doesn't make you a failure. It makes you a human being. You know, we are all human beings and we have the right to fail. We have the right to succeed. We have the right to produce what we can produce. And so therefore, don't think of yourself as a failure if you have a bad day. You're only having a bad day because of your circumstances, because of how you're feeling in the moment, and that can correct itself. You have both good and bad days because this is what we are as human beings. We're not perfect. But that's the first one, all or nothing thinking. Now, the second one is overgeneralization, to overgeneralize. And what this means is this: if something happens to you once, it's going to happen to you over and over again. And that, now you've got to consider all of these things I'm telling you is kind of blended together. This will lead to black and white thinking. If something happens to me and I trip over a stone, it means anytime I walk on a certain pathway, I'm going to trip over a stone. you know, and it's like, it's happened to me once, it's going to happen again. If I fail a test, well, I'm going to fail all of them. If I don't get a good mark or make a mistake, supposing I'm in a play and I forget my lines for a certain part, and so I muff those lines, well, it's going to happen again. I can't do this because I failed at it once, and therefore I'm going to fail at it again. I made this mistake once, and now I'm going to forever make the same mistake again. It's like waiting for that second shoe to drop. I did it wrong once, so I'm going to continue to do it wrong. Every time I try it, I'm going to do it wrong. And so you see how that can lead to all or nothing thinking, because if I don't do it perfectly, I'm a failure. And I didn't do it perfectly, and I did less than what I should have, or I forgot this, or whatever the situation is, that means every time I try it, the same thing's going to happen. So I tried to go and do a part in a play, and I missed some lines. That means I can't be trusted to do any of those lines again right ever, because if it happened to me once, what's to prevent me from going and making the same mistake again and again and again? And you put yourself in a bad situation where you start to perceive yourself as a failure. Now, we have to remember about perception. Perception is what we think. Perception is what we believe. Perception is how we look at the life. And we believe our perceptions are true. And so therefore, if I believe that life sucks, well, then I believe it. You know, if I think that, well, life isn't worth it, I can't do anything right, I can't do anything the way I want to do it, I'm always going to be a failure. Well, you do self-talk, and you tell yourself that over and over again, you're going to believe that it's true, and you're going to tell yourself that becomes a part of your belief system. And when you perceive a certain thing, it may not be true, but you perceive it as being true, you start to believe it as being true. That's your truth. I can't do public speaking, I get too nervous. I just cannot do it. I really can't do it. I'm going to fail at it. Every time I try it, I'm going to fail at it. So therefore, I can't do it. My perception of myself is I'm not top-notch. I'm not the best person, because I'm going to fail at what I try to do because it happened once, or it happened twice. It may have happened 3 or 4 times. And for these people, they get stage fright. They get a problem with their perception in terms of, do they have the ability to learn? Can they do the learning that they need to do? Can they do all right in a job that requires them to know certain things? What's going to prevent them from failing? What's going to prevent them from failing is the fact that they don't trust themselves to learn, and they don't trust themselves to grow. And we all learn and we all grow, but they won't trust it because it happened once, it's going to happen again. It happened 3 or 4 times, it's going to continually happen. I just can't do it. You know, if you're afraid of elevators, I can't go on an elevator, it frightens me. Every time I get on the elevator, I feel nauseous, I feel dizzy, I feel weak, I just cannot do it. So you've taught yourself that you can't do it by your own words. This is where self-talk can be ruinous if it's not used correctly. It's not a case of I can get on over a period of time and maybe just take a run up 1 floor and back 1 floor. You know, I can't gradually learn how to do this and be comfortable with it. So therefore, my fear of elevators is going to continue forever. I can't go on an elevator. You see, these can be so intertwined, and it's how one can lead to another, because you're saying it happened once, my fear happened once, it's going to continue, so therefore I'm going to lead myself into all or nothing thinking. If I didn't do it right once, I'll never be able to do it. And then after that, it could even lead to phobias. I can't get on an elevator because I always feel sick when I'm on an elevator. It's not a one-time thing. Now I can't do it at all. And then before you know it, you've got a phobia of elevators. I can't go on, I'm too afraid. And so you have to go through a series of treatments, which can be done, so you're not afraid of elevators, you know? They say if you get stuck on an elevator and you're nervous about it, the best thing that you can do is to sit on the floor. If you have the physical ability to sit down, sit on the floor. Because when you sit on the floor, it seems like there's a lot of space around you. You don't feel so hemmed in. If you're standing up, well, the top of the elevator may not be that high, and of course the rest of you are standing up and you're standing on the floor of the elevator. But if you're sitting on the floor of the elevator, it seems like there's lots of space around you. You're not so likely to feel like you're hemmed in. That's just, I've read that. I mean, I'm not afraid of elevators. I don't like them. I have to say, I don't like elevators. But on the other hand, I'm not afraid to use them either. Now, mental filter. This is the next one, mental filter. What happens? You pick out a negative detail in any situation and you dwell on it. And then you see the whole situation is negative. So supposing you're giving a solo and there's one part that you didn't do exactly right. You missed the key signature. You did this or you did that. And you dwell on that one mistake you made. And suddenly, the whole performance is down the tubes. It was awful. I missed this note. Or you're giving a speech. It's awful. I missed this phrase. I didn't discuss this. I left out a page, you know? I gave a talk once, and I was going to give a solo with the same thing. It was a presentation I was giving to a church group. And I was doing a solo, and I lost my place. You know what I did? I just made up the rest of it. Just made it up and played it as I thought of it in my head. They didn't know the difference. Afterwards, I said, well, this is what happened to me when I played the solo. And we all got a good laugh about it. Everybody thought it was funny. It sounded fine. And I went on with it, and it was fine. But you see, if I shrunk back and say, oh, I can't do this. I missed this part. I missed this note. I didn't turn the page right. I didn't do this. I didn't do that. And I based my whole perceptions on the thing I did wrong. It really wasn't even that wrong. And no one would even notice it. And if I didn't mention it to them, but I mentioned it to them because I wanted them to know that if you make a mistake, this is not the end of the world. A lot of times nobody's going to know it's a mistake, and even if they do, so what? We're all human. You see, I don't expect perfection from people. If I'm teaching a group of students, and I many times have done that, I don't expect them to get it all right. And if they don't, so what? They're kids, you know? They're going to miss things sometimes. It's all right, you're a human being. Don't worry about it. And so there it is. I had a student, I always taught them stage presence when I taught them. If we were going to a recital, we were going to be performing a concert or whatever. And this one student, I was beside her. I stood beside my young students so they wouldn't get such stage fright. And somebody came in to the auditorium after we started playing, and she wanted to know who it was. She thought it might be a friend of hers, so she looked up. She took her eyes off the music, and she looked up to see who it was. And she totally lost her place. She didn't know where she was. She totally lost her place in the music. And so what I did, I took my finger and I pointed where she should be. And then I started playing that, and she caught on to it, and then she started playing with me. It was all right. But she had learned a valuable lesson. When you're playing something, when you're doing a solo, when you're doing a performance, don't take your eyes off from what you're doing. If anything happens, it happens, but don't take your eyes on what you're doing. I was playing a solo from the Messiah, and it was a difficult solo from the Messiah, and I was doing it in a Christmas concert. Nobody told me that they were going to send in some sacred dances to dance to the music. And I'm looking at the music, and I'm playing, and I'm fine with it. And all of a sudden, I'm aware that there are people around me in costume, swirling around doing dance steps. Why nobody ever told me that, I don't know. But at least I had the wisdom not to look up to see what they were doing. I just was zeroed in on the music, counted the beats, played it. I never missed a beat. And then after they danced for a little while, they just went off, and I was still playing, and I never missed a note. But if I had been curious and looked up and like, what are you doing here? You know, I didn't know this was going to happen. I could have got lost in the music. I could have lost my place, and then what would I have done? Well, I would have just played, and tried to catch up to where I was supposed to be, but it wouldn't have been as good. But at any rate, when you focus on a mistake that you make and you think that a whole performance or a whole job interview or whatever it is that you're involved with is nothing because you made a little mistake, that's just putting yourself under a spotlight that you don't need to be under. Nobody expects people to be absolutely perfect. Nobody expects it. But we expect it of ourselves. And then when we're not, we're disappointed in ourselves, and then we feel that we're failures. One thing leads to another. Perception is everything. When I say perception is everything, I mean perception is everything. It's what you think that causes you to believe what you believe. And you think in a negative way, you are going to think in terms of, oh, I'll never be able to do this. And then you put yourself in such a negative light. You tend to believe what the negativity is. So instead of helping yourself by talking to yourself in a positive way, you actually cause yourself to believe negative of yourself. And then that's what destroys you. It's not the mistake. It's what happens after the mistake when you convince yourself that you don't have worth or you can't do certain things. That's the thing that destroys you. But you can put a stop to it. Just don't think that way. Decide you're going to think in a different way. Even write down statements of what you're going to believe and read off those statements to yourself, and then you're going to turn it around. You can turn it around and things can be better. Now, I see we don't have much time left. I'm going to continue to do this on the next segment because we haven't finished, and I think hopefully we can get through it on the next segment. If not, we'll just take as much time as we need. I'm not in a hurry to do this. I just want you to get the best out of it that you can. So we'll close it here. Please join me next time.